Yeah, folks, we have a new edition of the Grand Arena game mode on the way soon. And with it, we're going to see 8 new cards thanks to 8 new champion skills. So I thought I'd talk through each of these, which ones might be the most powerful. Also, it's just cool to look at some new card designs entering the world of Marvel Snap. We're also finally getting some good pixel art in Marvel Snap because this is a tie-in with the new game Cosmic Invasion, I think it's called, which is like a pixel style beat 'em up, like old school Marvel arcade cabinets that I played a ton back in the day. It actually looks pretty sick, but they're doing a little tie-in here, and this is art from the games. We're getting actual legit good pixel art, which I love to see, and some new cards, which I love to see. Now, I think this is going to be landing the game mode, not Cosmic Invasion. I think the game mode's coming on December 5th. As far as I saw from some data mined schedules, so we're still about a week away, but I had a little gap here in my video schedule to squeeze this in. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of these new champion skills, the pre-made decks, and so on, kicking things off here with Berserker Rage. Now, I should say this skill is not for Wolverine. This is actually for the new card Weapon X, which I know this isn't in the game just yet, so I thought we'd cover Weapon X real fast. This is a 2/2 that reads, after one of your other cards is destroyed, +1 power. After every third time, improve this effect by 1. So for the first 3 cards that are destroyed, it gets +1, +1, +1, goes up to 2/5, but then it ticks up and starts giving you +2. So for the 4th, 5th, and 6th card destroyed, it gets +2, +2, +2. That's another +6. Now we're up to 211. And then if you get that far, it goes to +3. So the idea here is about quantity of destroys in order to scale up your Weapon X. And because this starts in your opening hand, because remember in Grand Arena, you start with 2 energy, this means you can play this down on turn 1 and then start using Berserker Rage every turn thereafter to destroy stuff really reliably. This is a 2-cost skill on reveal. Destroy your cards here with less power than your champion. Add a copy of this to your hand with +1 cost. So initially, right, you're going to be destroying low-powered stuff that is smaller than your Weapon X. You need some like X23s, head pools. Here, X23s nerf to 1 power might actually help you out. Bucky Barnes as a 1 power card. All of those could be great targets for your Berserker Rage. That start pushing up your Weapon X. Then you can hit some bigger stuff, right? Keep moving along the chain, destroying more and more things, where even if you're maybe not getting a lot of value directly out of those destroys, you're still feeding into kind of a 3-pronged win condition, I think, which is Weapon X scaling, Null getting crazy big, and then Death as some splash stats on top of other stuff, like, for instance, Sabretooth in this pre-built deck list, which I think it's really cool to have cards like Sabretooth and Headpool that you just keep throwing in and again and again and again into that Berserker Rage, feeding it. You know, eventually your Berserker Rage is going to get big enough to handle Sabretooth. Now, since you do have Berserker Rage and it keeps coming back into your hand, you may be able to cut some of the other destroy stuff. Like, do you need Deathlock? Do you need Carnage? Can you rely on just Berserker Rage? Like, it does get more expensive, but even at 3 or 4, it might be worth it because that allows you to squeeze in more stuff to destroy. For instance, criminal to me that this deck doesn't have a Killmonger in the mix, especially like Killmonger Squirrel Girl. Could be a combination that just instantly increments your Weapon X, crazy discounts your Death. You know, that's a great way to get going already on Weapon X and get your Berserker Rage into an even better spot too. So, you know, I think you could actually cut some of the destroyers and just use this for 2 or 3 destroys instead of having to run so many. And that allows you to focus on the goal of the deck, which is getting bigger and getting some points. And even cards like Moira X, I think, could be really, really interesting. That seems like the sort of thing that could be banned in Grand Arena, actually. I don't know how that's going to go, but if not, Moira X could be nuts. But any other things you can feed into the destroy package as the things you're destroying could be really powerful to increment all this up. So I actually think this pre-made deck is close. I would probably just take out a couple of those destroyers, rely on the natural hits, go from there. There's, you know, even some greedy stuff you could do if you can play Null on turn 5 because you're going to have extra energy in Grand Arena. You know, throw a Mystique in the mix is another way to get a win condition if you want, but that might be greedy. Throw Arnim Zola in the mix? That might not actually be too greedy because it's probably good on both Weapon X and Null at some level. So, you know, a few power cards you could add into the mix, potentially a few destroy things you could pull away. But I think basically this looks good because of its consistency and just allowing you to build the deck with that consistency in mind, lets you get a little bit greedier, run some more interesting stuff that makes that three-pronged attack we talk about even better. So I do actually think Berserker Rage is a pretty nice little card here. And I will say too, like, you can play this on the Weapon X location, which is really nice because it's destroy cards with less power than your champion, which obviously means it can never destroy your champion. So if Wolverine and X-23 roll over into Weapon X, you're not disrupted, unlike, say, a Carnage or Venom, where you might destroy your Weapon X and stop those chains. So it's actually a pretty cool little trick there to make sure your Weapon X is actually staying alive and continuing to scale. So ultimately, I think this actually looks pretty good. Pre-made deck list isn't too far off, but a few things I think you could improve. So next up here, let's move on over to Iron Man with a new skill, Stark Technology. This one's 1 energy and reads, on reveal, after this turn, give your champion +2 power for each location you're winning. So this is one of those, playing for priority sort of cards, Terrax style card, and it can give you a really nice buff on your Iron Man. Like +6 potentially on your Iron Man is kind of crazy. That makes him an absolute powerhouse. 12 power on his own, and anything next to him basically means they're going to tag team a location all by themselves. Hydra Bob, another 8. Like, that's really, really strong right there. Just a 1-drop in Iron Man, enough to win a location. Sign me up. Now you can see this pre-made deck is really built with that in mind too, with a lot of really high tempo, low cost cards. So 1/4s, 2/6s, stuff to just get down early to make sure that you're winning locations. Now you do have 2 energy to start, so you're looking at like Herbie, Iron Patriot on turn 1, maybe a Bob or a Black Cat or something, Lizard, right? But you need to find a window probably on turn 3 where you play your Stark Technology, because like turn 1 you're probably playing 1 card, turn 2 you're going to want to play like a 2-drop and a Stark Technology, so you'd only be winning 2 spots. You might want to try to greed it for all 3 spots on turn 3. Now, this deck does have a few other like on-theme cards, Crossbones and Viv Vision, Iron Patriot, that are about winning locations, which I think is really fun thematically. I don't know that I would go that route. It almost feels like doubling down too much. Like, Viv Vision is not great at helping you win locations. She's a payoff, much like Stark Technology, which is nice sometimes if you don't know that you're going to have your normal payoff, but you're always going to have Stark Technology. I might actually just run a 3-drop that's like a higher tempo 3-drop that helps me win my Stark Technology for sure, right? Like maybe I run Gladiator as a 3/8 alongside my Stark Technology to make sure my Stark Technology is hitting. Perhaps you can get away with Viv Vision. I mean, it definitely is a fun thematic fit. Cards like Nocturne, though, I definitely would put a bigger 3-drop in the mix for something like Nocturne, I think, as far as I'm concerned. But at the end of the day, pretty good deck list, I think. It's doing a lot of things you would expect to do. Mystique's really nice too, because you're going to have your Iron Man. That's a guaranteed line. You can play it pretty early too, so Mystique has some flexibility, right? That's all nice. So some good little combinations here, some good really early tempo. I think really interesting payoff with the guaranteed, well, I can't say guaranteed, but very likely +4 or +6 on Iron Man. A lot of that to like. I might just tweak a few cards in this list, but I think it's actually pretty close and pretty cool and well built. And I think, a big Iron Man is a nice win condition. It could arguably be 2 all in, but yeah, I think this is still pretty promising. Yeah, next up here we have Shield Throw. This is Captain America's champion skill, 3 cost. On reveal, put an ongoing card from your deck here with +1 power, and then shuffle a copy of this into your deck. So basically able to cheat an ongoing card from out of your deck into play. And the Shield Throw goes back. If you actually redraw it, you can do that again, which is why we see King Eitri in the list here in the pre-made deck, which I think is a pretty sneaky fun way to get another Shield Throw. Do it again each time, potentially saving a significant amount of energy. If you cheat a Claw or a Blue Marvel into play, you've suddenly got a 3-cost Claw and Blue Marvel that also, by the way, got a little buff. So I think stacking your deck with, higher cost, high payoff ongoing cards, and then using Shield Throw to cheat them into play could be really nice. Now, when we look at the pre-made deck here, it does have a handful of pretty low-cost things that I think would be rather disappointing to hit. An Ant-Man only getting +1 is not worth it for 3 energy, right? Even Goliath, maybe. Sam Wilson, Captain America, not worth it, right? I still don't really want to pay 3 for Sam Wilson. It wouldn't be a total disaster, but I'm not excited about it when, I could instead hit a 5 or 6 cost ongoing card instead and really cheat some big time energy. Stuff like Captain Carter might be worth it just because, she's a really powerful card and the buff feeds into her nicely as well. So there are probably some things around the 3-cost spot that feel fair or a little higher than fair. But I think I would probably try to build a deck that instead of going all in on the ongoing package, maybe has like 3 or 4 things. So there's a little bit of redundancy. You could technically just do one thing like, hey, I really need to draw Sarah, and I'm going to put only Sarah in my deck, and Shield Throw is a guaranteed way to get a Sarah down on turn 3. The problem is it's not guaranteed, because if you draw Sarah normally before then well, it's also turn 2, by the way. You can play this on turn 2, but 4/3 energy. If you draw Sarah organically, then your Shield Throw is dead. So you might want a little redundancy, maybe 2, 3, 4 even ongoing cards to make sure there's something still in your deck for the Shield Throw to hit, at least on the first instance, and maybe even if you redraw it for the second instance. You also do just, of course, have Captain America in your deck, and he wants ongoing cards to buff, so you need at least a few things probably for Captain to actually feel worth it, which it's like, okay, man, Sam is so good with regular Captain America, but it's like Sam is kind of bad with Shield Throws. There is some little conflicts at play there, but I do still ultimately think, like, listen, this is just crazy efficient. Getting tutored big cards out of your deck like this is just so powerful of an effect. I think you can construct a deck list that's going to make sense, that maybe doesn't have the low rolls of Ant-Man Goliath. Maybe it's not even a full ongoing deck like Spectrum, but you just have a package of those 3 or 4 really powerful cards alongside a bunch of other just good stuff, and you can probably make that work really, really effectively. So I, in essence, think Shield Throw is potentially very, very powerful, even if I don't think this pre-made deck necessarily captures it in the most powerful way. Probably still a good deck for the record. Like, you'll hit Ant-Man some games, but other games you'll just hit awesome stuff and be happy to have this sort of consistency and output. So, solid pre-made deck with a lot more potential. Ultimately, though, I think a very powerful skill. Moving on here to Wakanda Forever. This is Black Panther's champion skill. It's a 5-cost skill with on reveal, give power equal to your champion's power to one of your cards here. So of course, make a really big Black Panther and then duplicate those stats onto potentially a key target, something that really loves those stats. Examples in the pre-made deck include Lasher, Scarlet Spider, even Herbie, if you caught him on his like doubling, would be really nice. But Scarlet Spider and Lasher in particular can be some really, really big payoffs if you get your Black Panther up to say like 20 power thanks to Shuri. You could also do Wong in there as well as another way to hit that more reliably, because you're going to have your Black Panther. So having a good turn 4 or at least 4 cost lead into your Black Panther does actually seem very valuable. So you can play Lasher on turn 1, Shuri comes down on like turn 3, Panther on turn 4 because we're in accelerated Grand Arena energy. Then you have some options, right? You could do like Taskmaster on turn 5 to get another like 20 power card and still use your Wakanda Forever on turn 6. So like, even though this is 5 energy and that's a little bit expensive and kind of clunky sometimes, the extra energy in Grand Arena really helps you get these things down sequentially in a powerful way, because that turn earlier Shuri, turn earlier Panther still gives you kind of 2 turns to do stuff. And Wakanda Forever, unlike Taskmaster, wherever your champion is, it's going to be fine, right? He just works. So, some big time hits. This deck list construction's a little interesting. Cards like Jennifer, Superior Spider-Man, helping you kind of cheat even more energy. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be worth it in Grand Arena. There's just, already so much energy cheat happening. You do kind of want some moments to squeeze in that Scarlet Spider, or at least have some kind of payoff card for that Wakanda Forever to hit, which if you're also trying to do Shuri stuff, like, doesn't necessarily always all fit in super well. But, there's number one, the argument that like Lasher's great because he's 2 costs and a payoff, but you don't necessarily have to have a card that's like doubling the buff. Any 2-drop hitting Jennifer Kale is actually pretty solid if it's 20 power, right? Like the 20 power in and of itself might just be enough to win anyway. So it's almost greedy in some ways to push for like a Lasher or a Scarlet Spider, or I don't know, there's probably other examples. Honestly, Captain Carter could be a cool example we just saw previously, where you can really, juice up these extra stats even further. That's fine. I think you'll want some of that. You don't necessarily have to have it though. So I do think this pre-made list is a good start. There's just probably some tweaking as always. I think you could do other things with this. I don't know if that Superior Spider-Man is either consistent enough. Like, yeah, Forge leads in, Herbie can lead in time, but do you even need it? Number one, like how consistent does that hit? I think you could swap out 4 or 5 cards here and end up with a better deck list. But I think, you know, some core of Shuri, Wong, Panther, Taskmaster, probably still Arnim's Old if he's not banned. I don't know what the bans are going to be, I don't even remember how bans work too well in Grand Arena, but I'm sure there's going to be some bans. So some combination of those sorts of cards as your payoffs, and then Wakanda Forever just adds another layer, and then some stuff like Lasher to make sure you have even bigger bonus hits for your Wakanda Forever. So ultimately, though, again, a card that can put out a lot of numbers when supported well, which I think you're going to be able to support it pretty well. All right, moving on here to Lord of the Negative Zone. This is a 4-cost skill for Annihilus. With on reveal, your champion steals 1 power from each other card here. So a couple things. Each other card does mean, you know, friendly and enemy cards. So you can take a lot of power and basically make your Annihilus really big. Also, this should work with the Annihilus in hand, like we've seen with Dormammu before. It doesn't have to be in play to steal the power. I think Annihilus should be the exact same way. So you can play this like on curve, play this on 3, and Annihilus on 4 with the accelerated energy of Grand Arena. If you'd like to, you wouldn't necessarily have to play the Annihilus yet. Now, keep in mind, you know, Laufey is in the pre-made deck there. Laufey does the same exact thing, basically. But interestingly, with the Annihilus here and rocks in particular, so if you play like a Rhino down, and then you steal a power from your rock, that then becomes a negative powered card, which Annihilus can then send over to clog out the opponent. It's kind of nice that, you know, with Annihilus's skill card here, Lord of the Negative Zone, you can do that and clog out that spot with a rock and then still play your high-powered card elsewhere. Whereas if you do that with Laufey, the kind of way to do that in the normal game right now, you'd kind of be playing that high-powered Laufey where you're also clogging up your opponent. So being able to move the power distribution away from Laufey in some ways does feel a little bit more advantageous to me. Also means you could lean into that even harder with stuff like, say, a debris, for instance. Do Lord of the Negative Zone in one spot, Laufey in one spot, or use the Hazmat, of course, to debuff those rocks. A few angles there to create those kind of clog lines where you're locking out your opponent. Viper also in the pre-made deck. I think she was banned previously, so we don't really know what the bans are going to be. I know I mentioned Sarah previously. She had also been banned previously, but I don't know the ban list. So apparently it's changing because Viper is back. Now, this deck, when I look at it, it does feel a little bit split down the middle to me. Like it's a little bit Affliction and a little bit Clog. And that's fine. Those things do play together nicely because, you know, you give stuff to your opponent and then you debuff it. Hey, that's more stuff to debuff. I get it. But I will say, too, like, I think sometimes those kind of can conflict a little bit. Like, for instance, in this deck, there's just a lot of stuff competing for the 4-cost slot. Sentry, Laufey, Doc Ock, and Lord of the Negative Zone, all your 4-cost cards. Yes, you have extra energy to play with, but that's still a lot of stuff to squeeze in. And it's like, is Sentry just a better lead into your Annihilus than Lord of the Negative Zone, right? Because I look at Lord of the Negative Zone and I'm like, man, even if my opponent has like 4 cards in that slot, you know, I'm effectively only swinging 8 power, stealing 4 from them, netting 4 myself. Of course, you can steal stuff from your own cards, but you know, that's not a net gain. It's just a shift, a redistribution. Could be good, but not a net gain. 4-8 is not a particularly high output card, right? So I think you kind of want to use this in a sneaky way, doing stuff like the rocks, using it for that clog angle. That might be more beneficial to you. But, you know, then it's just like, again, it's competing for all that timing windows with Sentry and Laufey and so on. And it's not really like that much better or different, perhaps, than your other cards. So I'm like a little bit just like, 4 does feel pretty expensive for this kind of effect. I feel like if it was 3, it'd have a lot more flexibility. It'd fit into these other cards a lot better from a curve standpoint. I kind of want to play this before Annihilus. It's kind of better to save for later. So I don't know. This pre-made deck list being split down the middle between Clog and Affliction also just makes me nervous. I feel like maybe you want to lean into one or the other and just really go that route. So at the end of the day, I am not as sold on Lord of the Negative Zone. I think this one's going to be clunky and ultimately just feel like it doesn't do enough for its cost. And maybe you could find a good deck list to make it decent, but I just think it's going to fall a bit short of the others. Moving on here to Inevitable. This is Thanos's champion skill card. It's a 4-cost again, reads on reveal. If your champion is in play with 20 or more power, destroy front row enemy cards here, even unrevealed ones. Now, also do note this pre-made deck here is including another new card. It's Chamber, so I thought we'd cover this real fast since he's not out yet. It's a 2/3 Well, at least the data mine version is a 2/3. Activate +2 power for each 5 cost or higher card you have here and in hand, which you can see this deck does actually have a lot of big stuff in it. So in some ways, this almost feels like a chamber deck more than a Thanos deck. But ultimately, you got some stuff for Thanos too. You got Marvel Boy, Gold Obsidian, King Eitri, Blue Marvel in there for your stones going wide. But you need a way to get Thanos up to 20 power, which if you look at the deck, the only way in that deck is with stones. There is no other way to buff your Thanos up to 20. So you have to play all 6 stones in order to make this skill card good. Now, I do think this skill card's really strong, right? Being able to destroy a couple cards is often really good for 4 power. You'll find a location where there's like one big thing usually, and that's enough to win you that spot. So you can do it, but it's just getting that Thanos to 20 power is not trivial, especially in this pre-made deck. Now, of course, if you want to move away from the pre-made deck, you don't have to rely on the stones. Something like a Shuri, for instance, might just be a home run. Like, hey, I'm just going to play Shuri, follow up with the Thanos. Curve's a little weird there, but you can make it work. Play Shuri on 4, even if you float an energy, weave in a stone or whatever. Play Thanos on 5 with the extra energy from Grand Arena. Play Inevitable on 6. Like, that still works really well. So you might have to go into a different route where it's like more hand buff, more Shuri, something that's more reliably going to get that Thanos to 20 power, which does sound like a pretty good game plan. I feel like Inevitable is going to be really strong in those cases, especially if you have kind of a nice wide baseline of power. You got 5 or 10 points already. Inevitable comes in, cleans up, 10, 15 from the opponent. That's going to win. Your Thanos location is going to be strong, obviously, because you've done Shuri Thanos stuff there. Ultimately, that gives you the 2 location swing that you need to win. So I think this deck looks like bait to me. This almost feels like more of a chamber deck. It's just like a lot of big stuff and like cheese with blink and lockjaw, which is cool, but it's definitely not an inevitable enabler because it's going to be so hard to get your stones out in that deck. Like, it's almost never going to happen. So outside of like location help, just completely useless way to support the skill card as far as this pre-made is concerned. That said, I don't think the pre-made is necessarily bad. I think it actually looks okay. The skill is not bad. The pre-made deck does here look pretty rough as far as supporting that skill is concerned. So next up here we have Massive Arsenal. This is a 2-cost skill for Rocket Raccoon. With the on reveal, banish this to move your champion here, and then repeat its on reveal and add a copy of this to your hand. So basically, you get to kind of bounce Rocket around every single turn, reactivating his on reveal, which, in essence is worth 4 power. Rocket is a 1/1 that goes to 5, right? So you get +4 power for 2 energy turn after turn after turn, while also potentially, activating other things like, say, a Werewolf by Night. They got Bishop in this list. You've also got stuff like Joaquin Torres, which could be another way to get extra power if you're moving your Rocket to the Joaquin Torres location. Just keep in mind, of course, that it's moving, so you can't do it on Joaquin every single turn or anything like that. So this is a really interesting play pattern, right? But keep in mind also, right, it's not a guaranteed +4. The on reveal has the conditionality. Like, you still have to predict where the opponent is going to play, which is not a guarantee. Like, you'll hit a lot, but not guaranteed. So sometimes this is 0 power, and all it's doing is moving the Rocket, which I think is going to make this really hard to play. Like, I think there's an interesting bounce deck they've put together there for the pre-made deck, like a bounce werewolf deck's pretty cool. A lot of fun stuff there. Some Guardians in the mix too is fun. I just think it's hard to weave in Massive Arsenal. I think if this cost 1, it would feel a lot more worth it, right? Because then you wouldn't be committing so much energy in a deck that wants to play a lot of little stuff often, right? 1 for 4 power feels a lot more reasonable in that situation. Bounces already kind of make things a little weird. Like, you could try to hit 2 rockets per turn, but calling 2 spots then as well is tough because you have to hit Rocket here and then you have to hit him again on the move for the Rockets. It's like not only just calling 1 location, but making sure you hit 2 is not going to happen. Some decks play 1 card per turn. So just a lot of little clunkiness in the mix there where you got to keep calling your shot, and it's kind of expensive to do it every time at 2 energy. So if this were 1 energy, I think it would fit a lot better into the curve of this deck. It'd be easier to weave in turn after turn, enable that werewolf more easily, as it stands at 2, I think this one's going to be really, really tough. I think it's just, the net gain basically on the rocket is not worth it. If this had something like, double your champion's location every time and you gave it like this human torch treatment, that could be crazy, right? Like that could scale up. If you missed, it's like, okay, whatever. If you hit, you start gaining 5, 10 every time you play it, potentially hitting some home runs. Maybe too good for the record, but I think just +4 per turn is not enough for this overhead basically, and I think this becomes much too hard to actually work with. All right, and then our final card here is Project Armageddon, which I love the look of this pixel Sentinel. This dude looks pretty baller, both in the skill and the real art. This is obviously Sentinel's skill card, 4 cost. On reveal, give your Sentinels +1 power for each created card you've played this game that isn't a Sentinels. This, as you can see here with the pre-made deck, plays really nicely into sort of a Victoria hand deck where you're trying to create cards. It does say cards you've played, so stuff like Squirrel does create cards, but you haven't played them, so you're not gonna be able to use a Squirrel, for instance, to juice this up. You're gonna have to generate those cards and then play them. So stuff like Merlin, Hawkeye, Mirage, those all make tons of sense, generating you cheap stuff to play down to juice up your Project Armageddon. There's also a little counter here too, so you can keep an eye on that, right? The only kind of awkwardness here is that you also need to be playing a lot of Sentinels because, obviously this is a buff on your Sentinels. So you want to have, maybe 2, 3, 4 Sentinels down, but the Sentinels don't count for the created cards. So you also have to be doing a lot of other things along the way. And despite, again, having all that extra energy, I'm worried it's going to be hard to get all of this stuff down. I could see scenarios where you maybe get this to a 4 or 5 power buff because you've played so many created cards, maybe even more than that, honestly. Might not be that hard to get like a 5 or 6 power buff, but maybe you only have 1 or 2 Sentinels because you just didn't have time to play out all your Sentinels. Alternatively, if you go for 4 or 5 Sentinels, maybe it's only a +2 or +3 buff, which I guess if I think about it, it's still like a lot of power, right? Like, if you hit 4 or 5 Sentinels for +3, you're talking about kind of a 415 or whatever, which is really nice. But I will say this, I think games where you hit Quinjet, you're going to pop off and go crazy, right? If you hit Quinjet early, all your Sentinels are going to cost 1 after that first one. That's going to be insane, right? Like, you're just going to go absolutely ham on those games. You're going to have lots of Sentinels and lots of other stuff to play. That's pretty cool. Games you don't hit Quinjet, I have a fear it's going to get clunky and hard to do this. And also just like, playing Sentinels in and of themselves aren't always the best or most rewarding plays. Like, clearly Victoria can help out, right? There's ways to juice them up alongside that. But I don't know. This one's hard to envision. This could be one where you play it and it's not as bad as I think, and the extra energy goes a really long way. And by the way, I don't know if you need stuff like Devil Dinosaur in the mix here. Like, he's probably fine, but I would probably cut that and just add more cheap generation and stuff, because I think you're gonna have enough things to play always. Like, spending your energy is not gonna be a challenge. Maybe this just goes absolutely nuts. I also could see that this is just awkward and hard to do, and like the pieces don't come in time and you just feel like you didn't do enough. So, like games where I hit Quinjet, Hawkeye, Merlin, I'm a god, right? I've got 1 million extra power. I've got 5 Sentinels, they're all getting +5. Like, forget it, game over, right? Games where you don't hit Quinjet and instead your hand is like, Mockingbird, Frigga, Bastion, and it's like, oh, this hand's like expensive and awkward. I don't have enough cheap enablers. My Sentinels aren't getting buffed. I don't want to play my Sentinels. Life gets kind of clunky in those scenarios. So I don't know. I really think there's a chance to see like the most broken of the skills, or just kind of a middling skill, and maybe even a bad skill, and I'm not sure there's a lot of in between. I think this is one I just need some experience to see and play. But I will say, if this is given 15 plus power, 4 energy is certainly not bad, and that could absolutely make it worth it. So I think there are some combinations there that make this pretty scary. I'm curious where you guys land on this one. Do you see the vision, or do you think it's going to be too tough? How far does that extra grand energy arena really go with Project Armageddon? All right, so all that said, I'm now going to go ahead and rate all these skills from the ones I think are going to be the best to the worst. My number 1 skill is Shield Throw. My number 2 is Wakanda Forever. Number 3 is Project Armageddon. I'm saying it's going to be good. Number 4 is Stark Technology. Number 5, Inevitable, just not with this deck. Number 6, Berserker Rage. Number 7, Lord of the Negative Zone. Number 8, Massive Arsenal. And there you go, folks. Those are the new skills for the Grand Arena. Let me know what you think about these. Are you excited to see all this new stuff in action? I will try to hop into the Grand Arena. If it comes out on December 5th, though, man, we have like a lot of new cards happening all at once. Like, you know, first new week of a season. It's going to be hard to squeeze in all those videos, but I do like just playing new stuff. So we might try, I don't know, whichever one of these looks the most fun. Maybe Wakanda or something. Maybe Project Armageddon actually looks pretty cool. I like the art a lot. So we'll try to try one of these, but let me know what you think. Stay tuned. Which ones do you like the best? What are you going to play? I want to hear all those thoughts and more down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and I guess I will see you around.